Welcome, everybody. It's super exciting to host yet another webinar for all of you. And today we have Ben Miller with us, and we are going to talk about PowerShell for the DBA. Where do I start? Before we hand over the stage to Ben Miller, here is a few quick updates about Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021, which is just around the corner, about kind of 2 to 3 weeks away. It's starting on September 8th with pre-cons, and then September 13th with the summit, and then September 20th with the post-cons. The key updates are 15 training classes have been announced. The session schedule is now live. 127 sessions have been scheduled round the clock, covering all time zones across 4 days. And we have slots covering APAC region, EMEA region, the Americas as well. So go and check out the schedule on dataplatformvirtualsummit.com. For our global audience, for the data professionals, training classes have always been a great pick at DPS. This year, we have lined up 15 training classes for you. And once you book a training class, you also get full access to the summit. Not only live attendance, but you also get the session recordings for the next 12 months streaming access. All that comes free along with the training class. If you look at the collection of training classes we have for you, you will see we are covering a wide variety of topics in Azure data analytics and AI stack, machine learning, artificial intelligence, data platform deployment, SQL managed instance, execution plan, SQL performance, developer best practices, data implementation, Power BI reporting, DAX, big data clusters, Azure Data Factory, variety of range of topics, lot of it. Of course, Synapse as well. But today Ben is with us, so I'm going to focus a bit on PowerShell for the DBA. Let me tell you something about Ben, and this will also give me an opportunity to introduce Ben to all of you. Ben Miller has years of experience working in the data industry. He is a Microsoft certified master, a rare and coveted achievement, which speaks volume of his caliber, capability, experience, and expertise in the data field. A SQL Server specialist, he focuses a lot on internals, PowerShell automation, administration, and performance tuning. He is also a Microsoft MVP from America. And it is super exciting and a great honor to host Ben today. He is going to do an 8-hour class at Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021. The 8-hour class is divided into 4 hours each day, and you get to attend live. You get the recordings for next 12 months streaming access. You get exclusive content and material also from Ben. And use this discount code SAVE20, which will give you $20 off on Ben's class or any other training class of your choice. So log on to dataplatformvirtualsummit.com, explore all the content that we have for you, browse the 127 sessions, look at the titles, the abstract, the speakers, look at the session schedule, all that comes to you complimentary along with the training class booking. Take a note, the content at DPS, we always try to give you latest up-to-date content. In virtual world, it's quite easy to get repeated content in virtual conferences, but we put in a lot of efforts to ensure that you get freshly baked sessions. With this, friends, talk to your managers, get sponsored, and join DPS 2021. That's the link for you. With this, I hand over the stage to Ben. Welcome, Ben. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amit. Okay, so today we're going to talk about PowerShell for the DBA. This presentation was really born because there's a lot of people that I talk to that say a few things. One, I don't really think I need PowerShell, which I think is okay for anybody who doesn't want to do PowerShell. I will tell you that is a lot of it is due to people not knowing how to start or not knowing what the benefits are. So this is very much going to address that concern. The other one is people really want to use PowerShell for the DBA stuff. And it is a very big topic when you start thinking about, I already know T-SQL, I'm a SQL guy, what would I do with PowerShell? And today we're going to talk about the tools that Microsoft has provided the simplistic nature of how to use the tools to dive into PowerShell. But mostly it's really about getting you started so that you don't have that barrier. There is a barrier to entry in most things, using Azure Data Studio, using Visual Studio Code. Those just are not native tools to DBAs. So today I'm going to take you through the start of how you begin and how to get the most out of, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to start. So let's get started with the presentation. This is the Yay Me slide. This is just to illustrate two things. On the bottom, I have my email address. You're welcome to email me anytime. And then my website is DBA Duck. I am DBA Duck everywhere on the web. So Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, DBA Duck is where I am. So you can find me there. It's also on GitHub. So there will be a lot of things out there that I create for use in PowerShell, and just getting ready to put some things out there for public domain stuff that will help you get started in PowerShell as well. This is the agenda. We're gonna go through. These are shorter pieces. The biggest piece is going to be the show me part, where we're going to do some demos. So I'm hoping to get through the slides. Slides are nice and they're good for reference, but they do have a hard time illustrating what you need to do in PowerShell. So we're going to do more in the PowerShell UI than we are in the slide realm. So we're going to get started. So basically we're going to start out. We're going to talk about the environment. The environment's probably the biggest barrier of entry. And I'll just illustrate what you need, and you'll need to work with your IT people to get that in place. Or if you have a luxury like I do, where you kind of get to control things, you know what to put in place. The tools, we'll talk about those. What tools do you need to get started and to use PowerShell going forward? The modules, PowerShell is not amazing unless you have modules. PowerShell has a lot of commands, but when it comes to DBA stuff and PowerShell for database administration, it really does need a module or some kind of mechanism to get you more productive, basically. Then we're going to talk about some PowerShell syntax for the DBAs. We're going to relate some of the things you might already know in T-SQL. We're going to relate how they show up in PowerShell so that you can get a jump on things. There are a few syntax things that are only in PowerShell. We'll illustrate some of those. But then we're just going to use PowerShell in the demos to show you some of the syntax stuff. And the last topic will be data versus objects. There's a lot of objects that we natively think in DBA land about SQL. A table is an object. We do sys.objects. We know about objects, but in PowerShell, there's going to be a lot of nuance in the object side that will help you get a jump on using it to do database administration instead of just knowing about the table. We can always select from sys.tables, but data versus objects will give you a good flavor of when you're dealing with objects, what do you do? When you're dealing with data, what can you do? And then last but not least will be the demos. So getting started, really the question you ask in the first place as a DBA is, why do I need PowerShell? In all my years of teaching PowerShell for the DBAs, it is a common question of what would I ever need in PowerShell that I can't get in T-SQL or Management Studio? And the reality is that PowerShell is on every Windows server, everyone. Ever since Windows 2008 R2, PowerShell has existed on the Windows platform. Now, it hasn't always been the latest version, but the latest version is 5.1, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it is on every box. So if you needed to quickly do something, it is not requiring Management Studio to be on the box. It's not requiring Azure Data Studio to be on the box. It's not requiring Visual Studio Code. So you have this tool that's just sitting there. With modules, you'll find out how powerful it is. So why do I need PowerShell? Sometimes in a pinch, it's really nice to be able to quickly expand a log file rather than doing the right-click thing and going into all things. So PowerShell will become your best friend when you start thinking about all the things that you do in a day. The second part of getting started is it going to be hard to learn? I get asked that all the time. Is it going to take a long time for me to learn this? Is it really hard? And the reality is that there are two types of PowerShell DBAs. One is a coder. A coder will roll up their sleeves and they've done a lot of coding. They might know some C#. They might only know T-SQL. But knowing T-SQL, you write stored procedures, you write triggers. Those aren't necessarily procedural languages as far as T-SQL goes. They're statement-based. But you already have the idea of the structure of code because you do a statement, whether it be a select statement, a declare statement, you do something, then you do something else, then you do something else, and that becomes a stored procedure. When you execute that stored procedure and you pass in parameters, everything is there. And you execute each statement one by one from start to finish. So you've already got the hang of coding, unless you're not coding T-SQL. If you're just using Management Studio, then you're probably in the executor state. The executor state just means that you're really not interested in writing script. You are just wanting to get crap done. You just want to get my stuff done and walk away. So executors have a great leg up today because of DBA tools module and SQL Server module, which we'll talk about. Great options for just being the executor. The key to getting started really is just about doing one thing every day until you cannot get enough. I promise. I started way back when PowerShell 1.0 was out and SMO 9.0 was out, which was 2005 SQL. And ever since then, it has just gotten better and better. And I will tell you, I use PowerShell every day of my career. From when I started, I've used PowerShell in some way to get something from the OS, to get something from Windows or from SQL, to get something done quickly with iteration. I've used it every day, and it is an indispensable tool to me now. I do other things in PowerShell now, and people who know me, they tease me because they say, "Well, how would you do this?" And the next question, the next answer would be like, "Well, let's try PowerShell." So indispensable as you get started. Now the environment is pretty simple. It used to be pretty complex because you had to download some things and install certain things. And today with PowerShell 5.1, which is native on Windows 10, native on Windows 2016 and above, you get 5.1. If you go 2012 R2, you get 4.0. If you do 2012 server, that's PowerShell 3.0. And then you get 2.0 on Windows 2008. So in reality, today it's best to use PowerShell 5.1. And this is why I said you work with your IT people or you put it on yourself. WinRM 5.1, which we'll talk about how to do that in the demos. WinRM 5.1 is Windows Remote Management. And that is what PowerShell is. You can download it from the web and install it on any OS greater than Windows 2008 R2. So even if you had Windows 2008 R2, you could install PowerShell 5.1 and still run it on there. 2012, same thing. 2012 R2, same thing. 16 and 19, it's native there, so you don't have to install it there. The fallback is PowerShell 3.0. You can still use DBA tools because that's the requirement is 3.0. I know that they've been thinking about raising that, but right now it's 3.0. So you could get away with Windows 2012 and still run DBA tools, but you wouldn't be able to run SQL Server module because it requires 5.1 because of the code that it uses inside. It needs 5.1 because it requires 4.7 .NET Framework and stuff like that. So you'll see where using the latest 5.1 is very valuable. And the benefit is that you can use this remotely. So in the environment, you don't have to have it on the SQL Server. You don't have to at all. You can actually have it on your workstation or your jump box that is Windows 10 or Windows 2016 and above, and it's native there. You don't have to install a darn thing. So that's really important. And then the last piece of the environment is your execution policy. There's many execution policies, and you'll see them out there. Remote signed is the default now in 2016 and above, and depends on which cumulative update you put on there. Different ones have changed this behavior. So you just check it. I'll show you how to do that in demo. But remote signed is where we'll live. Basically, that means that anything local doesn't have to be signed and it can be ran just normal. If you're running it from a UNC, a network location, it has to be signed because it's remote. So remote signed means everything remote has to be signed with the certificate to run, and everything local can run. There's others like all signed and other things, but for the most part, remote signed is the secure way to do remote execution. The tools, really, these are the list of tools that you're going to be using. This is the ones I'm going to show you in the demo. SQL Server Management Studio is typically a staple for all DBAs. They typically run this in some flavor. I will tell you that you will want to plan on getting the latest. The latest is 18.9.2. If you're 18.9.1, you're fine, but each of these revisions have been updated, and you'll see why this matters here in the demo. We'll show you Management Studio in a way you may not have seen it before, but it's really, really important that you stay up to date with the Management Studio piece when you're using PowerShell with it. Azure Data Studio gets installed by default unless you tell it not to when you install the latest Management Studio, and mostly because you have integration now from Management Studio to Azure Data Studio, and you'll see that. Visual Studio Code is a great thing. It's the father of Azure Data Studio. Azure Data Studio is a derivative of Visual Studio Code. The difference really is that Visual Studio Code has a debug because it's used for C# and other things. Azure Data Studio has not enabled that feature. So the debug where you can step through your code is only available in Visual Studio Code. And I don't put Visual Studio proper here, like Visual Studio 2019. You can also run PowerShell in that too as well. But that's, I guess with Visual Studio Community, you could use that. But Visual Studio Professional or Enterprise is a paid for thing. And I'm trying to go help people with free things first. If you want to go seek out other UIs, you can do that. There's several out there that you can do. And then obviously PowerShell. And the ISE comes with PowerShell. The ISE is not always enabled by default on Windows Server. You have to check and make sure it is if you want to use it. It has been deprecated, so it is not being developed at all anymore, but it is useful in a pinch. If you need a quick editor instead of just a PowerShell window, and you want to edit a script and save it, ISE is a great way to just quickly open it up, edit it. It has IntelliSense in it, execute it, and then close ISE. It's great use for a fast edit. Now, modules, really, you're going to see a lot more about modules in the demos. The way to get all commands, it's basically a way to get all the commands that you want paired together with one import statement. Rather than having 50 PS1 files that you have to dot source in, it is much simpler to put them in a module and then do an import module. DBA Tools has over 500 commands in it, and I can get access to all 500 by importing the module DBA Tools. So the DBA Tools module is a community-driven module fathered by Chrissy Lemaire. She started it all way back when she was migrating some servers, and it really was tools to migrate SQL servers. That's what it began as. Over time, everybody wanted access to this. They wanted to use her scripts to migrate databases to another instance. And so DBA Tools was born. She open sourced it. It allowed us to contribute. I've contributed some functions. I'm still contributing new functions. There's a lot of people that have contributed, and they've gone through a lot of vetting to make sure that the commands run. They have documentation. They're required by the author. And it's a fantastic resource to get stuff done when you're just an executor. This is the executor's heaven. By using these commands in this module, they don't have to create them. They don't have to write the function. They don't have to really understand what they do per se, other than testing them in test, make sure they do what they expect to do, and then use that in production. The SQL Server module is written by Microsoft, and they have a lot of additions, which I'll show you a few of them today. to get you started. There's a lot more. We could go a whole day, which I will in the virtual summit. We'll go through a lot more than we do today, but this is meant to give you a flavor of what you can do and how you can start to make sure that you get what you need to understand before you jump in the deep end of the pool. There's other modules that I use, import Excel, PoshRS job, and there's a lot more that you can use out there. If you want to go have some fun, go out to PowerShellGallery.com and search for SQL. And there's so many that people have written that are just modules that you can download and install for yourself and try them out and see what they do. But mostly just to get your feet wet and get started. Now, here's going to be a quick little syntax for DBAs that help you understand how PowerShell works. PowerShell is a dynamic language, which means you do not declare variables. Everything is dynamic. It infers the data type. When I type in a string into a variable, it infers that it's a string. If I do an int, it will do an int. All sorts of things. But this is the syntax. We all are familiar with @variable name int, which is a declared variable of type int. Unassigned, that variable will be null. In PowerShell, everything is null unless it's assigned. You don't declare it in the dynamic languages. So PowerShell, you just assign it a value. $, and we use a $sign instead of an @. That's important too. $varname equals 2. It auto types inferred, and unassigned varname doesn't exist. Or if you tried to access the variable without assigning it a value, it would just be null. It would not exist. And so it would just be null so that you can tell whether the variable exists by testing it against null. Comparison operators, we're used to the @varname equals @varname2. That says, am I equal? And you either get a true or false. In PowerShell, you still do use the $varname, but instead of the equal sign is an assignment statement in PowerShell. The comparison operator is actually -eq for equals, right? It's a very short syntax. There are a lot of comparison operators. Not equal to is -ne. I have them in demo, so I won't belabor them here, but they are very different in comparison. In T-SQL, we're used to setting them equal to something and comparing them with equals. And PowerShell just distinguishes the comparison with a dash and then a comparison operator. So that's how it works. Code blocks, we're used to T-SQL. If this begin, there's my code block begin, do my statements, and then do an end. And that's my code block. I can do an else, and then a begin and an end. I can do a try catch, and then an end try. So there's code blocks in T-SQL. We're very familiar with those as we use them. In PowerShell, they're the syntax of C#. They're curly braces. That's the way they've chosen to do it. So you get the curly braces begin, and then the curly braces will end it. One's an open, one's a close. So it's pretty simple. The last piece of PowerShell syntax is the pipeline. T-SQL, there is no pipeline. The power in PowerShell is the pipeline, where we can take a variable, $var, pipe it with a pipe symbol to get service, and it will map the variable being passed in to whatever parameter accepts input from the pipeline, and get service will execute with that. So we'll show you a few examples of those. But again, we're just trying to get started, not trying to give you a in-depth view. So we want to be able to get you over the hurdle of, I have no idea how to start. So the last pieces on this slide really are about iteration. We are familiar with select because we have a select clause of T-SQL. We're familiar with where clauses, where we filter. When we're familiar with sort clauses, like order by clauses of T-SQL, these act close to the same. They act in principle the same. The syntax is different, and the output or the result is a little different, but you'll get it when I show you. And then the format command is basically you can format as a list or you can format as a table. And this removes all usefulness of the data that you just formatted. Once you format it, it's useless to you in the pipeline. Other than for display. That's pretty much all you get out of the format list, is you get to see it better on the GUI. But the reality is that you won't in your functions, or you won't get formatted output when you use DBA tools, or when you use SQL Server module to get stuff. You won't get anything like unusable data unless you pipe that to format list or format table. You'll see that in demo. It'll become pretty important for you to see. And the last piece before we go into demo is really about data versus objects. We are used to in SQL to do a select column, column, column from table, where column equals 1, order by column 2. And what we get out of that in Management Studio is a big bunch of data. Now, really, in reality, it's an object because it's kind of like either a row with columns and data in the row, or it's a data table with rows and columns and data in the columns. But the reality is we're really used to data in T-SQL. We get data all the time. The object side is when you right-click on a database and you do properties. You see data on the screen, but behind the scenes, it's really an object. It has properties, methods, and events all built into that object. When you go and change the options in a database properties, and you say change torn page detection to checksum, and I click OK, there's an object behind that that goes and sets that value to be checksum. Rather than data, if I select from sys databases and I select the page verify description and it says torn page detection, that's just data. I can't do a thing with it except say, yep, it's torn page detection. I have to go into the object, right-click database, properties, options, change the page verify to checksum, and click OK to make that change. Or I can type it in T-SQL, whichever one you want. But the point is that there's data when you pull it out in PowerShell, and the data is nice. It's just metadata. It's data about another SQL object or another object like a service. But an object is a representation of the SQL object or the other object that you can manipulate. And I'll show you the difference. And this will help you get started with what do I do and why do I care? This is the biggest reason why you care. The ability for a DBA to affect a database or to affect a table or an index by dropping it or something with a command rather than writing the T-SQL is super powerful. And this is where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, is using objects rather than data. There will be times you're just going to get data, and that's totally fine. But what we're after here in this presentation is teaching you about what objects you have access to and why that matters to get started with PowerShell. So that's the slide deck for today. And so we have plenty of time here to do our demo. So let's dive in here. So first we have Management Studio. We're all familiar with it. It's really nice. We're going to start with Azure Data Studio because this will play into that. When I installed this version of Management Studio, I did get Azure Data Studio with it, and I can do Azure Data Studio here. The reason why this is important to know how to deal with is because by default, it doesn't understand PowerShell. It basically is a query tool that you can use for data. This used to be a different name. It used to be Operations Studio, but Azure Data Studio gives me the ability to connect to a SQL Server and a database and do a query, okay? So I can do new query, or I can say manage. And manage will let me do some other things like new query and new notebook and back it up and restore it. So Azure Data Studio understands this. In new query, I can do a select. Okay, so this is nice. Let's not do tables because there's nothing there yet. I run this, I get my data. So it's really nice. It's kind of a nice tool. It's lightweight, runs really fast. There really isn't a lot of properties that you can do like you can in Management Studio. But here's what we need to know for PowerShell. I click on this extensions button. It's little boxes popped out. In extensions here, you can have an admin pack for SQL, which is nice. You just click install. Anything written by Microsoft is pretty darn safe, but this platform allows me to develop any one of my own modules or what they call extensions. We're going to use this one today. So Azure PowerShell. This says develop PowerShell scripts in Azure Data Studio. I will do the same thing in Visual Studio Code as well to get this installed. But I click install, it installs, and now I have it. Okay, and now I have an integrated console here, and the integrated console understands the PowerShell way. So if I said get service, I get all my, now it just understood PowerShell because I'm in my PowerShell terminal. You can have multiple ones if you want to. This is a special console, and it has some side effects. I typically don't demo in the PowerShell integrated console because I usually start a transcript, and a transcript will get mangled in this console. They haven't been able to fix it, and they may not be willing to all fix it. But I can go here and I can launch a real PowerShell window. That is actually, so if I do $host, you'll see that, let's do this guy here. You'll see that I'm in a console host and version 5.1. If I go back to my other terminal, come on. Oh, you're not going to be nice to me, huh? Just a second. They've changed this look. If I did $host here, you'll see that I'm in a Visual Studio Code host, which is different. It's version 2024. So this is still running PowerShell under the covers, but it's its own host. And so if you want a native host, you just go with a PowerShell window. You have the ability to add another console to like PowerShell Core. PowerShell 6.1, 6.2, 7.1, 7.2, stuff like that. You can do that as well. We're just going to stay in Windows PowerShell today. But Windows, I mean, PowerShell itself in PowerShell 7 actually can run on Linux. So you can actually have a PowerShell interface in Linux and do much of the same things here. So we've installed it here. We're gonna go down to Visual Studio Code and show you that it is decently the same. It starts in dark mode, which is, you can do that. But if I click extensions here, you'll see that I get the option to do a lot more. And it's probably a little harder to find here, but I'm just going to type in PowerShell. And it will filter it. And here it is PowerShell develop PowerShell module in PowerShell. Let's click this guy and commands and scripts in Visual Studio Code. I click install here. And sure enough, it will do the same thing once it's installed. It lets me set the color thing if I want to, but here's my PowerShell integrated console. And yeah, fine. And then I can also do the same thing and say PowerShell here to get a new one that is actually PowerShell. So we have the integrated console and the PowerShell window. If I do host here, you'll see that I am in console host and 5.1. So the tools, really cool. We're going to go back to, we're not going to do anything in Visual Studio Code because I'm going to exit this one and we're going to be fine that way. If I go back to Management Studio, I don't know how many of you noticed, but this is an instance one and instance two. If I right click on this database, you'll notice that there is a start PowerShell here, which we'll talk about in a second. I'm going to launch it and show you what comes up. And then I'm going to start this as well. I'm going to right click and say Azure Data Studio. And look at that, new notebook or new query. So if I say new query, it will actually open Azure Data Studio, connect to my connections here. Here's my connection I am in now, demo 1, SQL 1, and it launched a new query window so that I can select start from sys.objects and run that command. And there's my data. So integration story is getting a lot better with the newer versions of Management Studio. And that's why they install Azure Data Studio with it. The new notebook part, that's a little more advanced. It's for another day, but note that if you guys are hardcore into notebooks and stuff, you have the option to do notebooks as well. Let's see. Do we have questions that we need to answer yet? Okay, good. All right, so the Management Studio is nice, and you do have options. If I was at a table level and I said right-click on the table and say Start PowerShell, it would bring me into that table. So notice the table here. I'm in all the way in. We'll teach you this in a second once we open up our demo script. So let's go into Azure Data Studio and open up our demo script. File open. We'll just open folder just to save us time. There we go. Nope, don't save. So now it's going to open up this, and I'm going to go into folders here. And here's my demos. And notice it colors it. It understands it's PowerShell because that's a PS1. If I were to say file, new file, it won't come in with a language. See, select the language to get started. So this is a new thing in the new Azure Data Studio. It used to make you save it as a .ps1 to use it, but now you can just select the language. So I can go down here to PowerShell and say it's a PowerShell file. And now it doesn't have to be named .ps1, but it will act like it is a PowerShell file. So the comment is green and it shows that this is a comment. So it understands it because I chose a language. This is new, which I like a lot because it was a real pain to have to save it as a PowerShell file before I could even edit it. This one lets you select a language and then you can edit in native PowerShell without having it to be saved or be a PS1. So here's our demo file. And we're going to go through this not really fast, but there's some things that you just need to see, and you can play with this on your own. But basically, comments. In T-SQL, we have a dash in front of the comment on a line, either at the front of the line or at the end of the line. And that will give you a single line comment. To do multi-line comments in PowerShell, or single line comments is just a £sign wherever you want the comment. So it can be after, like piece version table. I can say this is a comment, and it acts just like T-SQL, where you have it at the end of a line and that will be ignored. And this will be the only thing it runs. And then the multi-line comments are in T-SQL, we have a / and a //. In PowerShell, it's what we call an open alligator tag, which is a less than and a pound, and then a pound and a greater than sign on different lines like this. This is a multi-line comment, and you can put anything in between without pounds at the front, and it will be all commented out. So if you want to quickly comment out a block of code, you just put this in the front, this in the back, and it's now commented. The other interesting thing in this UI, and it's kind of the same as it is in the ISE, is whatever terminal I'm on, I can execute this command in that terminal. So integrated console, I'm in there as far as it's focused. I can run this by hitting F8. So F8 will actually run the current line that you're on, or I can highlight multiple lines, hit F8, and it will run both of them. Okay, so that's kind of slick, but that gives you the ability to have this big long script and only execute a line at a time or a selection at a time. So you don't have to worry about executing the whole script. This is an example of a command, get WMI object with a parameter. Our parameters are dashed instead of added or comma separated. We never put commas in a command except here. So when we do a select is the only thing that allows commas, and a sort. A where clause, you have to do something special. A for each, you have to do something special. Basically, in PowerShell, this turns into an array. So you don't want to do this by calling this and saying class, or if we wanted to do multiple things, we put a comma here. We don't want to put commas for the parameters like we would in a T-SQL place. We always separate them with spaces and the next parameter. You'll get the hang of this, but it's important just to at least introduce you to it. So when you see commands out on the web, you don't go, what is that? I don't understand. But this basically, if I execute this, you'll see what it gives me. It gives me my, I didn't pipe it to format list. Pipe to format list star, and then execute. Now I get my computer name is SQL01. My status is okay. My caption of my OS is Windows 2019 standard. And then this is my hard disk partition. that it shows me what it is to see Windows basically on this partition of the device hard disk 0. So I get that by select. Notice I just did select with the commas between the names, and then I formatted the list with a pipe. So I pipelined the data I got out of here. I pipelined it and grabbed the objects, and I pipe that to format list, and I get my list of options. So kind of cool, but this is what you can see when you execute a command. This had no script whatsoever. It was just a command. I'm an executor. There was a commandlet called get WMyObject and a parameter called class. I looked up what to do for the operating system, and the class was called Win32 operating system. And then I basically selected properties from this object. So that's kind of cool. The modules part is really where you're going to win. If you want to import a module or you want to use a command, say you knew the command called get-SQL login was in the SQL Server module. I would still recommend when you get started, just learn what modules you need to import and be explicit. So this will save you a lot of headache as a beginner or as a starter, is being explicit which module you're loading, because PowerShell 3 and above has a feature called auto loading. So if you had a set of modules that had duplicate commands in them, it would let you import both modules. But when you executed the command, if you didn't import the module explicitly, the command would try to auto load the module that contains that command. And it does it in a very special way. There is a variable in the environment called PS module path. And you can see it here. Let's do this guy here. Right click, properties, and I'll show you in the environment variables thing here, you will see in your user, in the system variables, there is one called PS module path. And it does things in this order. It looks in your program files, Windows PowerShell modules first. Then it looks in the root of where PowerShell came from modules second. And then it looks in this special one that is where Microsoft put the SQL PS module. So the thing you need to know about this is that we can get to it through PowerShell as well. But I wanted to show you to you in Windows because you can change it there for permanent. But in this particular case, it shows us C users, DBA documents, Windows PowerShell modules. Then it shows me program files, Windows PowerShell modules. And then it shows me the modules. But notice this one wasn't in our list when I said advanced system properties. And that's because it's system properties. It always adds your personal folder first. So if you put modules in there and you don't put them in the global sense, they will always load from there first. So if you have a different version of DBA tools in that folder than you have in the program files folder, it will load yours first. So if you have an old version, you haven't updated in a while, you've only updated the global one, then it will load the old one because it looks in this order. If you want to change this order, you can change it temporarily by changing this variable in this window, and it will change it for this session. So it's something you might do in your profile. But then it goes down, and this one's the last one. And the reason why is because in times past, and again, this is a later operating system and the latest version of SQL. In your older versions of SQL, 2014, 2016, this folder actually was put at the front. So when you said get-SQL login, it would load SQL PS first, and then it would run the old version. SQL PS has been deprecated. So in this case, just be aware, there is a module called SQL PS on every SQL server. So on your workstation, if you haven't installed SQL Server, you will never see this module. It's gone. It used to be installed with SQL Management Studio, but it is no longer installed with Management Studio. The SQL Server module, which is this guy, The SQL Server module is what is used now by Management Studio, and I'll show you how to tell. But this is the one that requires 5.1 PowerShell. This one requires 3.0 PowerShell. So just be aware that that's the case. If you want to install them in PowerShell 5.1, you have the option to install dash module. This is part of your getting started and getting your environment set up. You install dash module in the SQL Server module and the DBA tools module. The big deal about SQL Server module is on a system that has SQL on it. If I install dash module SQL Server only, it will actually come up and throw an error and won't install, because it detects that some of the commands in SQL Server are the same as the module commands in SQL PS. And by default, Windows PowerShell warns you or throws an error so that you can't install a second module with a duplicate command, because it's confusing to the user. But you also have the option, if I wanted to, I'm on a SQL Server, so I would have the option of saying install module SQL Server dash allow clobber. I love that word, clobber. It's kind of one of those kid words. Go clobber him, or whatever. But the allow clobber basically says, hey, PowerShell, I understand that I have this other module that has some commands that are the same as the one I'm installing, but I really, really want this module I'm trying to install. So please just install it. So it does, because you said allow clobber. And that means allow a module to be installed that has a command that's the same as a command on the system already. And you're just going to allow clobber. So now I get SQL PS and SQL Server installed on the same box. And that's totally okay. Because again, what they did with your PS module path is they said, you're going to be able to use the program files first. So if you auto load a command called get-SQL login, it will auto load SQL Server and you're happy camper. Okay. So that's the important part here, allow clobber. There is an update module SQL Server and an update module command that goes out to the PowerShell gallery and looks for a newer command and will update the ones that you want to. So if I said this, just execute this command, it will go and execute the, oh, I can't do it in Azure Data Studio because I'm not running Azure Data Studio as administrator. It does take administrator rights because it puts it in program files. So I would have to go out here to this guy and I would have to update module DBA tools. What I did here in another window is basically showed that this is the current version on my system. I did a find dash module, which went out to PowerShell Gallery and asked, do you know about this module? And it tells me what the latest version is, 1.1.12. So it's definitely different. Mine's 1.0.153. I can update my module with the update module DBA tools. It will go out to the web, grab the latest, and we won't watch this, but we'll come back and show you that it did indeed update. We're not going to import module DBA tools here yet. We're going to wait for it to update here. Let me say yes. This is another thing that trips people up, is that it will ask you, it says it's an untrusted repository. So I will show you this when it finishes, how to get that not to do that so that it just installs so you don't have to say yes to every one of them. It's basically a trust issue, basically. But it's important to know how to get around that. Oh, I think it just finished. So I can say get-ps repository, and it shows me that PS Gallery is the default and PowerShellGallery.com is the source location, but it's untrusted. I can actually say set-ps repository and do a name of PS Gallery, and it is case insensitive. So I could say just PS Gallery. PowerShell is case insensitive, so you don't have to worry about that. I'll show you in a place in a minute where it is case sensitive, but that's because the SQL Server is case sensitive, not because PowerShell is. But I can say my name is there, and it's called the installation policy, and I can just say trusted. Once I do that, it will run, and when I get PS repository now, it says trusted. So if I set update module, we'll just do an install module. Install dash module, import Excel. It won't ask me to, do you want to install this? It won't ask me at all, but I am running as an administrator so I can install it in the right place, but it just installed it. So I don't have to do yes or no. So that's what this does, the trusted policy. And also the one thing I was going to show you is get dash execution policy. This is a 2019 box. So by default, it is remote signed. There is an option to do a lot of other ones, but right now, this is the only thing you need to get started. So don't think about all the other ones. They're for you when you learn more. The update module, the find module, and the install module, and actually the uninstall module, are PowerShell 5.1 isms. That's what you get when you have PowerShell 5.1. If you want to do it differently, there's a different class we can go. I can teach you how to manually install these modules that run on 4, but you can't do install dash module on 4. So there is a way to download them from PowerShell Gallery and get them installed for you. All right, so let's move on to another important part of getting started. One of the benefits of SQL Management Studio is that I can start PowerShell. Now, I've already started PowerShell a couple times here in the demo 1 database. I just want to illustrate a couple things. In SQL Server, which we're going to go to in here, we're going to get module. This will tell me what's loaded. I see that SQL Server module is loaded, and it's that version. With SQL Server module, there's a SQL Server provider, and it has a drive called SQL Server. And when I do a directory here, there's a SQL, which is the database engine. Now, it has other things like SQL registrations to get your registered servers. It has policy-based management. It has data tier applications. It has lots of things that you can do, X events, database X events. But today we're going to focus on this guy. So if I CD into SQL and notice it's not case sensitive, I said SQL, but I typed in small SQL. If I do a directory here, this won't always show up in directory, but this basically reads the registry to say, what machine names am I on? This SQL server is named SQL 01. And notice it is case insensitive because that doesn't matter. And then if I do a dir, this doesn't always show, but maybe it always does in this version of PowerShell module. So if you have anything less than 18.245, you may not see this. You may see blank. But notice the instance name. Because I don't have an instance name, I'm just SQL 01. There's no instance. It's a default instance, so they use the word default as your instance. Now, once I get into this level of the provider, I have to authenticate to do anything further. Right now, these are just registry entries. So I can just go right into them. But as soon as I do a directory here, it's going to have to authenticate me. And now it brings back things if I've authenticated. If I'm not authorized in SQL Server to get in, then it will deny me and say, I'm sorry, you can't log in. But right now we see audits, availability groups, we see databases, we see endpoints, job server, that's our SQL job agent, our SQL agent, logins. So we have containers kind of like we see here. We go into security and there's our logins. Oh, there we go. We have logins. So if I went out here and said dir logins, you would notice that it happened here. Now, if my SQL Server is case sensitive, binary collation or case sensitive location or a collation, I have to type these things to get them. I have to type them exactly in the case they are because it's case sensitive. It's just like if you did a select statement in Management Studio, you have to match the case of the collation. So just know that this is options, and this is what you see here when we go into right click and go in here. We are in the databases container and we're inside the demo 1 database. So if I type dir here, we get a lot more roles, plan guides, file groups, all sorts of stuff. If I want to go into tables, it will grab me the tables and display them. Now this is the data, but if I grab this and piped it into a variable, so tables equals, and I say tables, I get the same view, but notice if I do an array and say get type, and this is all in the demo code for you to see. I get a get type of, it is actually of type table, and it's an SMO base. So it is actually an object that I can say tables 0.name, and I get table 1 Ben. If I left off the array and just said name, I'd get all my names, table 1 Ben, table 2, table 3. Okay, so awesome deal that allows us the ability to see things in objects. The benefit is, say I wanted to drop this table. The benefit of objects is that I say table 0, because we know the name is table 1 Ben. I can say drop. And now if I say tables, I still see it in my object, but what happens if I say tables.refresh? Okay, well, let's do this. Let's refresh it over here. The table 1 Ben is gone. So if I come out here, yeah, I'm not sure why it did a refresh here, but tables is actually because I'm in the provider. So I'm actually have individual objects here, and tables wouldn't run the refresh for table 1 Ben because I dropped it. So if I do tables again, I'll still see it because it couldn't refresh this guy. But if I do another directory, so I say table 1 equals dir and do tables now, whoops, I'll see only 2. So in the provider, I have to do a dir again to get it refreshed because it's individual objects. In SMO, I don't have to I can just do tables because it's a collection in SMO. But I just wanted to illustrate that this provider gives you access to all of these guys programmatically. And that becomes really key when you want to quickly drop these tables. What if I wanted to drop all these tables? In the provider, you get this special thing. If I did a dir, I can do a dir pipe to remove item. And now if I right click here and do refresh, they're gone. All tables are gone. So the power of going, I want to right click on the database, start PowerShell, and it starts me right in I can even right click on tables and say start PowerShell, and it will start me in the tables container of this database, and I can do dir. Okay, so the PowerShell interface inside Management Studio gives me a really good flavor. And the other benefit is that this guy, if I say get module, it did load the actual SQL Server module. In older versions, it loaded the SQL PS module, which is old and yucky and not very great. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of the different things that you can do in PowerShell. There is a demo script that you'll get. It illustrates some of these other things. I didn't want to go through them. I wanted to show you more of the SQL side. But the one thing that I will show you here, just to cap out the last part of the PowerShell provider part, is that if I went out to databases and did a dir, what you don't see is any system databases. Because in the PowerShell SQL Server provider, they wanted to filter out the system objects so you could deal with real user objects. Now, you can still see, if you're a Jedi and want to use the force, you can do dir.-force, and you can then see tempdb and master model and MSDB. If you want to change that for good, there is a variable called SQL Server include system objects. And it's only good for this session, but I can set SQL Server include system objects equals true. And now I just have to do a dir instead of a dir force, and I can see my system objects. And this applies to every object. So just know that if I want to set it back to false, do a dir, it omits my system objects. Now I don't have to worry about doing a directory of these databases and drop, or trying to drop databases. So if I came in here and I said, I want all the databases that are named demo and I want to drop them, I could actually go into here and say dir, or the real command is get child item in PowerShell. The dir is just an alias. If I say get child item and I say where object, and I say name is like demo star. Now I only see these two. If I want to drop them, I can just do pipe to remove dash item. Now, how is that for? Oh, and it probably won't drop one because I'm in it on Azure Data Studio. Let me close this guy. I don't want to close that guy. Let me get my server thing. Oh, I'm disconnected. It should be good. It's going to try to drop something that I'm probably, yeah, because it's currently in use. And I don't think it dropped any of the databases because, it dropped the other two, it dropped the other one. So demo 1 couldn't be dropped, but demo 2 actually is now gone, or demo DB is actually gone. If I refresh, demo DB is gone. So it gives you a real quick ability to affect not worrying about the system databases by having that flag set. But again, the rest of it is in here to do equations, not equal, equal. Here's your help for about comparison operators to read all about it. There's more in this demo script for you to do, but I didn't want to take up the time because it's more PowerShell than DBA stuff. But the last thing I want to show you is just the DBA tools part, where we import module DBA tools. And okay, it's being silly. Yeah, I'm not sure why this is doing that. It shouldn't, because I should be able to just import module DBA tools. Yeah, this is a new demo machine, and Azure Data Studio has some new functionality that is not, this may be a function of the new version of DBA tools that I downloaded, the 1.1.12. Shouldn't do this, but it looks like it works here. It doesn't like it if you import SQL Server or SQL PS first, because it likes to be first. It just likes to be first. This is just a warning. It doesn't stop you from using it, but get -DBA login with a SQL instance of SQL 1 will get me my logins, so I can see all of them. So this is an idea of an executor where I don't have to code anything. There's a function already there. I just do the parameter SQL instance, pass in my SQL instance. I can actually say comma, which is an array, SQL 02, and it will give me all of them for the SQL 1 and 02, and give me all of them for that. So anyway, I think I'm out of time, but I thank you for your attention, and I will get this uploaded to the DPG people and make sure that you have access to this demo script so you can play with it. Let's go back to slides and finish out. PowerShell can be learned. Do not panic. It can be learned, and it doesn't take a lot. One command a day. Learn one command a day and use it and learn it, and then you'll get more commands. And soon you'll actually be able to do real work with PowerShell and the commands in the modules. And this is the end. My email address is there. My website is there. I'm DBA Duck everywhere, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, GitHub, stuff like that. I thank you for coming to this webinar, and hopefully we'll see you at the virtual summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your time. Wonderful presentation and great demos, and very crisp and precise. Thank you so very much. Then one question Emily has is, what cannot be done using PowerShell in SQL? Limitations. Ben, for you?
Really, so the idea of limitations, there really isn't a whole lot of limitations, because when using SMO, I didn't show you a lot of SMO because that's more of an advanced thing where you start using SMO itself. But SMO actually is used by Management Studio. So whatever you can do in Management Studio, you can do in PowerShell with every object. Every object has a drop. Every object has an alter. So you can set properties and do an alter, and it will change them. It will write the T-SQL for you and send it to SQL to affect it. There's all sorts of things like we're used to alter database with rollback immediate. There are those options as well in PowerShell. So you can do just exactly what you're doing in T-SQL without writing T-SQL. So you can actually treat it like a function. Now, there's a lot of functions inside DBA tools. They're not everything. There's not, I mean, we haven't written every function to do something to a SQL Server object. But the most common ones that you'd use, restore, backup database, all those are in DBA tools with just parameters. So you write the command, do a parameter of SQL instance of this instance, the database equals this, and all that stuff, and execute it, and it will do backups for you. It will do restores for you. It will do all sorts. It'll get backup history for you. It will get job history for you. All those things without writing a lick of T-SQL and without right-clicking, right? Don't know right-clicking or double-clicking on job history and then, you know, all those things. So I don't know. There are some, I will say there are some limitations in that there are some advanced functions on T-SQL that they've run, that they've created in new versions of SQL. I know of an example that they had to add on a bug report. In SMO, they did not have the option to see whether your database had advanced, accelerated database recovery turned on. There was no property, there was no method to change that. But I filed a bug and they put it in. They added it to SMO and they added it to the properties so you could see it. But those are the only limitations I know about, is the ones that are brand new and they may not have added them to the SMO library. But other than that, I haven't run into anything that I can't do. I can do DBCCs. I can do all sorts of things inside of PowerShell. There's one more limitation you need to know about. Any DMV. So if you were to go after the DMV of the sysdm OS performance counters, you can only get that in T-SQL. But you could write a function in PowerShell to execute that statement against SQL and get the data back. So you technically aren't limited. It's just not in the SMO library to execute all DMVs. There's no method to do that today. And I don't think they plan on making that possible. So that is one limitation that I can specifically call out, that it is a limitation that you might want, but it would take not very much work to create one for you. They just didn't want to add it to the SMO object.
Thank you, Ben. Have a good day. Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Friends, bye. Enjoy. Have a good day.